Honourable Lady for Bishop Auckland wanted to speak. Having just rushed into the chamber, she may feel it's not appropriate to do so at the moment, but I'd be very happy if she wished to speak, and then I will obviously sum up on that basis.
I'm very sorry that I wasn't here at the beginning of the debate. I want to congratulate the Honourable Member for Strangford, obviously, who's raised this very important issue about which we're all extremely concerned. It overlaps with a debate we had on the situation of the Uyghur people and the camps that those people are in a few months ago, because this is where some of these activities are thought to be going on. And I would also say that this is something I have been concerned about for some time. I think I first asked a parliamentary question about it in 2006. So this is a long-standing issue. But since I wasn't in the debate, all I will say is congratulations to the Honourable Member for Strangford, and we look forward to hearing from the Minister what he's going to do about it.
Minister.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Speaker, and thank you, the Honourable Lady for Bishop Auckland, for giving me a mere 29 minutes to sum up on this particular debate. I have to say she was very ably deputised for the gentleman for Manchester Gorton who spoke from the Labour benches. May I actually, first of all, and this is a very serious issue, so I don't want to be too light-hearted, but it is great here to be able to congratulate the Honourable Member for Strangford for securing this debate, congratulating him also on his birthday yesterday, and of course there's also a birthday girl in the chamber today, the Honourable Lady for Congleton. I'm sure there were misprints in the Times about the age, if I may say so. But obviously something in the water, these issues of human rights, obviously for these late March babies being born. But I know that both of these honourable members, and indeed others, of course, have raised major concerns about this specific issue going back many years. And may I commend the characteristic dedication and welcome the opportunity to set out a little bit about the government's position. But I also recognise, and I think the Honourable Lady for North Ayrshire and Arran also put sort of pressure on that we absolutely need to do more in this regard. And I think if we can work together with officials, but if I can set out the position, which I suspect may not entirely be satisfactory in the eyes of some of those who've contributed today, but if I can just say that my own commitment as Minister is to try to, if not, let's say, ramp up the pressure. The issue, I think, is to try and raise the profile of this issue internationally, because I think all of us know it is only internationally that we can make a genuine impact on the broader ethics of the issue of organ harvesting, as well as obviously on some of the specifics about what we do in the WHO and indeed other United Nations related organisations. May I also, actually touching on the brief contribution made by the Honourable Lady for Bishop Auckland, make reference to me reiterate the broader government concerns about the human rights situation in the northwest of China, in Xinjiang province, and about wider reports of the restrictions of freedom of religion and belief in that area. Many members will be aware that the government's extensive concerns about that situation in Xinjiang, which I had the chance to discuss and debate with members here in this chamber as recently as the 29th of January. There are credible reports that over 1 million Uyghur have been held in extrajudicial camps in Xinjiang, and that they have faced a plethora of restrictions on their cultural and religious freedoms. We also have very substantial evidence of instances of persecution of other religious minorities, and referred to here Christians, a range of Muslims and from different Muslim sects, Buddhists, as well as Falun Gong practitioners, all facing both persecution and interference in their places of worship, their religious teaching, and their customs. The UK government is deeply concerned by this situation. In the past year, no fewer than 3 different ministers, including myself, have raised our concerns about human rights directly with our Chinese counterparts when out in Beijing, or indeed in a range of international and public fora. Furthermore, at the most recent session of the UN Human Rights Council earlier this month, in March 2019, our Minister for Human Rights, Lord Ahmed, raised our concerns about Xinjiang in his opening address. The UK has also raised this issue in our national statement, and we co-sponsored a side event focusing on human rights in Xinjiang as a whole. Turning, if I may, to the specific issue of this debate of the Chinese state-sanctioned or state-sponsored organ harvesting. In the testimony made today, members have outlined very deep concerns about the sheer number of transplants taking place in China, which far exceeds the publicly reported supply of organs available. Some have suggested the reason for this must be that the Chinese state-sponsored and sanctioned organ harvesting. Others have alluded, I think, to reports that the supposed donors are held extrajudicially and murdered on demand to supply organs to wealthy Chinese and foreign patients. Now, if true, and we have to recognise there has to be evidence to these matters, if that were true, of course, these practices would be truly horrifying. And clearly, we need to properly and fully investigate such reports and allegations very carefully and have a fact-based establishment. It is clear, and certainly the case, that China's organ transplant policy and system is far from transparent as we would understand it in this part of the world. We're also aware, we're also aware of the cultural sensitivities in China regarding voluntary organ donation, and the number of registered donors there is very low. Yes, of course, I give way to the Honourable Lady.
Thank the Minister for giving way, and of course I should also have congratulated the Honourable Member for Strangford in bringing this debate forward. But does the Minister agree that the UK has a duty to update legislation so that we can, specifically I was looking at the Human Tissue Act of 2004, so that we can prevent UK citizens from travelling to China and participating in forced organ donation, whether knowingly or not? He has raised the issue of the doubts we have over what is happening. Whilst those doubts exist, surely we must be doing more here to prevent them travelling to China.
If I may, I'll come on to that issue, if I may, for the Honourable Lady for Glasgow North West later on in my speech. I was going to make a specific passage on that. Listen, I think all of us recognise that there are international comparators that were referred to by the Honourable Lady for Congleton on this very matter. It's one of the areas I think I would like to explore, and if I may, I don't want to commit further than that. I suspect it may be a Home Office related or indeed a Department of Health related matter, but I think she makes a very serious point. It was made, as I say, by the Honourable Lady for Congleton, that there are some ethical issues, and again, if I may, to touch on them later on in my comments. If I may return to what I was saying, if it would appear that in the past a significant proportion of organs were taken routinely from executed prisoners without prior consent. China committed to stopping this practice from January of 2015. And whilst this was an important and a positive step, there are still, I think, very fundamental ethical questions about the ability of condemned prisoners in China to give free and valid consent. Indeed, China's use of the death penalty is in itself, of course, subject of great concern, not least because there is no transparency about the number of executions it carries out. Many NGOs have assessed that China executes more people than the rest of the world combined. But again, there are no accurate figures available. We advocate against the use of the death penalty worldwide, as honourable members will know, in all circumstances. That happens in China. There are a number of other countries that are close allies of this country that also still maintain the death penalty, and we will absolutely routinely not just condemn that practice, but will advocate against it. I know that many members today have outlined the concern that organs are not only being taken from executed death row prisoners, but also directly from prisoners of conscience, primarily Falun Gong practitioners and other religious and ethnic minorities. Those concerns have been raised that sometimes organs are removed while the victim is still alive and indeed without anaesthetic. There is a growing body of research into this issue, much of which is very worrying. One key source, as the Honourable Gentleman for Strangford rightly referenced in his own speech, is the written analysis by David Kilgour, David Mattis and Ethan Gutman. My officials have studied their latest report very carefully and consider it to be a very important source of new information about China's organ transplantation system. It points out that it is extremely difficult to verify the number of organ transplants conducted in China each year, and indeed the sources of those organs. The report rightly questions the lack of transparency in China's organ transplant system, but it also acknowledges that there is a lack of incontrovertible evidence of wrongdoing. The authors themselves make clear they have no smoking gun or smoking scalpel, as they might put it, to prove their allegations. they are necessarily forced to rely upon assumptions and less than rigorous research techniques. Now, some of those assumptions came up in a number of contributions that were made, particularly about statistical assumptions. But I do have to say these are still assumptions, and we have to work on the basis of rigorous evidence, and obviously we're trying to develop as big a body of that as we can. For example, having to infer the scale of organ transplant system from hospital promotional material and media reports rather than perhaps properly corroborated data sources. Of course, I'll give way.
Thank you, Minister, for a very comprehensive reply. Minister, along with all the evidence that you've referred to and which many of us have referred to in our contribution, is the Minister aware of the US, United States of America, CECC report at Washington, where they also referred to a very clear evidential base, which I think maybe might help the Minister when it comes to gauging and bringing together all of the information? Those investigations that they have carried out, they also recognise the China tribunal outcome. With that being the case, it would seem to me, with all this wealth of evidence across the world, here and at home, as the Minister's referred to, but also in the United States of America, that you can't ignore that.
Thank God, I am now aware of it, and I will try to learn more, obviously, in our future discussions on this matter. But the Kilger, Mattas and Gutmann report was used at the recent tribunal organised by the International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China, and chaired, as has been referred to, by the eminent lawyer Sir Geoffrey Nice, which of course my officials were able to attend. Additional evidence considered by this tribunal was due to be published online earlier in the year. We are still awaiting for it to be uploaded, but we are aware of their provisional findings, parts of which of course have been quoted quite extensively by honourable members today. Obviously, we await with great interest their full publication. From all the available credible evidence, it appears that China has not fully implemented the organ transplant commitments that it made in January of 2015. However, the World Health Organization takes the view that from their observations, China is putting into place a system of donation and transplantation that it regards as ethical, voluntary, and allocates organs in a fair, transparent and traceable way in keeping with international norms and principles. This is a view the World Health Organization does share with a number of the world's leading experts on organ donation and transplantation. May I just touch, if I may, on a few of the issues that a number of members raised about the WHO and indeed UN and international pressure. I have to say to honourable members, the World Health Organization does not have a mandate or a role to act as an inspector to see if new policies are being adhered to in China or indeed in any other country. However, we will make the WHO very much aware of this debate and indeed the new evidence that is being brought in the sources to which I've referred, as well as obviously a copy of Hansard and the concerns that are being raised here. We've also noted with interest the work that has been done, as I say, by the tribunal and the information generated so far. We don't want to obviously duplicate that work, and therefore we're very keen to utilise the evidence that when it is finally published. May I just say this? The question that was put, I think, by the Honourable Lady for Congleton, whether we can call on the UN now to undertake an inquiry, whether we go down the process of pushing for a rapporteur on this specific issue. We are and will continue to work closely with international partners in the UN Human Rights Council on a range of human rights issues in China. In the past, this has included calling upon China to implement the recommendations regarding Xinjiang and the UN's Committee for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, and to allow a UN unrestricted access to monitor this implementation. We have obviously as a priority Xinjiang, but I do appreciate that this now is a separate issue, actually going beyond that, for which there is now an increasingly important body of evidence that is being amassed. I would like to work closely to try and pass on and try and work again within the international community, within the UN, that we can make some genuine progress in this regard. I'll give way.
And will that include liaising with the American roving ambassador for religion and belief, who only in the past week has expressed concern about human rights issues in China in quite strong terms?
I should be delighted to do so. I suspect it will be my colleague, Lord Ahmed who will do that, but I think it does make a lot of sense, not least given our relationship in the United Nations, that we do that. And we shall generally continue to scrutinise this situation very carefully, and we welcome all new evidence. At present, however, it is our assessment there is not a strong enough evidential base to substantiate many of the claims that have come up today that there is systematic state-sponsored or sanctioned organ harvesting taking place in China. Yes, of course.
For giving way. And I referred to the Honourable Lady who was unfortunately not able to hear at the beginning, but she referred to her previous debate to do with the Uyghurs. I understand there is an evidential base, Minister. 15 million Uyghurs have been DNA blood tested to get compatibility of their tissue matching for those for organ transplant. 9 crematoriums have been constructed in Xinjiang province. The first crematorium hired 50 security guards. Just some of the stories that are going. But there's a dedicated organ transplant lane at Ürge Airport. If those aren't evidence of what's taken place, then I ask myself, what is?
I thank the honourable gentleman for what he has said. And okay, we are as I say, the evidence for the deep concerns has been made in the course of this debate. The notion of it being on such a basis that it is state sanctioned, we are still some way, we believe, from that. However, as I say, I'm well aware that there are now a number of interested parties who are looking at this, to which I've referred already and to which he has referred. And I think we, as I say, will work within the international community on what is an issue that I think is going to rise up the attention span of many political many countries who have obviously deep concerns on these matters. Now, several honourable members, and in particular the Honourable Lady the Honourable Lady is actually representing the Scottish Nationalist Party, raised the separate but related issue of British citizens travelling to China for medical treatment, the so-called organ tourism. We don't collect, not really able to collect data on this, but we believe that relatively few people in the UK choose to travel to China for this purpose. Now, as it stands, the British government cannot prevent these individuals from travelling, and indeed, I think all of us would recognise it is probably quite difficult to police that and to understand whether people have gone for that purpose. But we also make it is important that we make it aware that other countries may have a very poor or a poorer medical and ethical safeguards than in the UK, and that in travelling abroad for treatment, including organ transplant, carries obviously some very fundamental risks. I think there's a broader issue here, if I may, there's a broader issue about the sheer ethics here, and I think that this debate is an important staging post, and I know that we've had debates on this matter in Parliament before, but the ethics of what we might call a sort of free market in transplanted organs. Health is one of the very few attributes that some of the poorest in the world have, and the notion that in the rich world we can take advantage of that, I think, is something that ethically is something that is we're going to find an even bigger concern. And travelling abroad, I think, travelling whether to China or elsewhere, is something that we will, again, want to work with other countries where there is manageable legislation that hopefully, I'll come back in a minute, if there is legislation that is in place that it seems to be operating effectively, that we should take very seriously. And I will go back, if I may come back to members with some thoughts at least about whether we feel this is practicable and can be brought into place. But I do listen and recognise the very deep concerns, and I think they reflect deeper ethical concerns about the notion of there being a free market for organs, and indeed any argument, and I think, as I say, I don't think there's any evidence for it, of large-scale travel for British citizens to take advantage of this terrible harvest. I'll give way.
I understand the Minister's point about the difficulty of preventing people from travelling, but I would ask the Minister, in his ending remarks there a moment ago, he hinted at this, that we look at passing a law preventing people from travelling, from being organ tourists, if you like, and that puts our moral position on the map and sets a marker, and I think that's very important. And also, as he says, we can look at what other countries like Italy has done, Taiwan, others have done, Israel, and what measures they have in place to prevent their citizens becoming organ tourists, because I think ethically it's very important, and it cannot be beyond the wit of any UK government to put such measures in place.
Thank you. Listen, I don't want to make any great commitment to this, obviously recognising it may well be another government department that has responsibility. But we don't just want to put laws into place, we want to make sure they're effective. And the worst of all worlds is to have some legislation that essentially is bypassed in a straightforward way. So if she will forgive me if I, rather than making a commitment now that I end up having to backtrack on, I'll leave it at this to say that obviously we will, given the depth of concern reflected by all members in this debate today, we will go back to try and look at, particularly with international comparators, about how we can craft some legislation that is going to be effective in a way that I think all of us would desire. Mrs. Moon, may I just conclude by taking this opportunity to reassure all honourable members here that, contrary to some suggestions, our trading and economic relationship to China does not prevent us from having very frank discussions with the Chinese authorities on issues of concern, or indeed does it affect our judgment on this particular very important and increasingly important issue. We shall continue to engage with China on a full range of issues, including human rights. I outlined earlier the UK's recent actions in the UN Human Rights Council and our vocal condemnation of the abuses perpetrated in Xinjiang. We shall continue to promote universal freedoms and human rights and to raise serious and well-founded concerns with China at the highest levels. May I thank all honourable members for their contributions today. I know that in this place we all have so much else that seems to be going on that crowds out so much interest elsewhere, and you know, I think it's also great to see so many people in the public gallery here today, obviously recognising that these are issues that are close to the hearts of many representatives, and whilst perhaps it is understandable that much of the coverage in the press focuses on the Brexit-related issues, there is still a terrific amount of work that goes on. I know that many honourable members, backbenchers and frontbenchers alike, have a focus on that. I certainly feel as a Foreign Office Minister that I try and do my level best to keep working hard, much as I'm afraid a few conversations abroad do obviously have a Brexit flavour to them. There is also a sense that there's important work to be done, and I reflect only last week having 2 days away at the OECD in Paris doing some very good work, standing up for the rules-based international order, working together in relation to anti-corruption and integrity matters with a number of other countries across the world. And I think it is actually rather important that all of us utilise our energies and in any way that we can to address the sort of important issues that we raise here today that I know we shall come back to, and I hope we will work closely with the government, with the Foreign Office and indeed other government departments to try and ensure that the terrible scourge of involuntary organ harvesting is something that before too long will be very firmly in the past.
Jim Shannon to wind up.
Thank you, Ms. Moon. First of all, can I thank the right honourable members for their contributions, very significant, very helpful, and towards an issue which we have a great interest in. I'm particularly thankful to the Minister for his response. I never doubted that his response wouldn't be honest and truthful and helpful, and I appreciate that. I understand the issues as we try to move forward, but I do, Minister, gently suggest that we do need to have every avenue of opportunity that we can to persuade China to stop what was referred to as the industrial scale removal of live organs. Members have referred to the religious and ethnic groups across the whole of China, those of Falun Gong, those of Christian and House Christians, those of the Uyghur Muslims, of the Tibetan Buddhists, of prisoners who are doing time for their crimes, but nonetheless do not and should not be have their organs removed. The honourable friend from Congleton was very helpful in her contributions, as indeed were all members. No victim to tell their stories, except for that person who found he had a heart defect and therefore was not suitable for a heart transplant. There's some of the evidential base. The honourable lady for the Scots Nats referred to this is something out of a science. Well, it's not something out of a science fiction novel, because it's worse than that. It's real life, or in this case, real death, and those are the issues. But for myself and for all of us, we're deeply indebted to you, Madam Ms Moon, for chairing the meeting, but also to all the members who have taken place, for the audience who have come and attended, and there's been a significant number of those who are here. We're here for one purpose. We want to see change. We want to see accountability. We want to see those who have their live organs removed, transplants removed, stopped. We want China to grasp the urgency of the issue. And I think the Minister referred to, yes he did, murder on demand. We can never sanction that, and we would urge the Chinese government to realise that and draw back. Ms Moon, thank you.
The question is that this House has considered forced live organ extraction in China. As many as of that opinion say aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order, order.